What's up, podcast family? Thank you so much for being here again with me. This week's guest is Keli Garza. She's the owner of Steamy Chick and the founder of the Peristeam Hydrotherapy Institute. Through her company, she raises awareness on the benefits of vaginal steaming. She makes supplies accessible, conducts research, and trains practitioners. Keli is also the creator of the Vaginal Steam World Map, which details places all over the world where vaginal steaming has taken place or there's history of it. And she is also the author of the fourth trimester vaginal steam study. She's the creator of the annual Steamy August Vaginal Steam Awareness Month and an upcoming documentary film with the working title Steam. Keli's story about how she became the Steamy Chick is unconventional and actually quite hilarious and involves a whole conversation on Gwyneth Paltrow. Get ready for that. She is super knowledgeable about the history of steaming, and I think what she shares is going to blow your mind, and likely by the end of this episode, you're going to want to start steaming. If you do, please tell me. I want to know all about it. So reach out to me on Instagram and let me know what you thought of this episode. Talk to you soon, and I hope you enjoy. Hi, Keli. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm so happy to be on the period party. Let's get it started.
I know, girl. I have wanted you to be on this podcast for ages. I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation because I think we have a lot of juicy stuff to talk about.
Ooh, okay.
Oh, yes, I know, right? Get ready. So I feel like you're the OG of vaginal steaming. Well, at least the modern day OG, because we know that this practice has been around for a long time. And so I'm curious, what made you decide to start doing this? Why did you start doing vaginal steams? How did you go on to create Steamy Chick?
Okay. So I first heard about vaginal steaming in Los Angeles, and I don't know if you've ever been to LA, but like LA is kind of like where I hear of all holistic things first,
Right.
And I was actually living in San Diego, and I drove up to LA, and my friend was like, "Come meet me at this womb circle we're doing." And I was like, "Okay." But I was really just there because we were going to the club after, and so she had me meet her there, and then from there we were gonna go to the club. And so I went in, I was kind of listening, and they were talking about different, exercises and movements for the womb and breath work and different things like that. And I didn't come to this actually having period problems like so many other people do, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have any period problems. I didn't really care about any of this stuff, but I was just, my friend was there, and the speaker, Marcia Lopez, was a Mayan abdominal womb healer. And so she mentioned vaginal steaming, and it was just kind of like, she mentioned it quickly, like at the end, it's like, "Oh, if you have really bad period cramps, you should steam." And she did a little demonstration of how to kneel on the floor and do a steam session. And I honestly was like, wow. I was like, only in LA, I thought I was so weird. And so, I left, went to the club and forgot about it basically. And then it was like the next year, and my period was missing. And so my period had been missing. We're going on month 2, month 3, and that's actually something kind of common for me. It's not that I had never had missing periods, but what I really noticed this time was that if I felt like my hormones were raging, like I didn't feel like myself, I felt like my emotions were out of control. And so I was like, my emotions are out of control. And then I was like, oh, I guess my hormones are out of control, because I really felt like I just couldn't, like, I felt like I was being taken away. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like I just couldn't get myself under control, my emotions under control. And so I was like, oh, this must be a hormonal imbalance. And then I was like, oh, that's right, my period hasn't come. I was like, so maybe that's why I have a hormonal imbalance. So I just was putting this stuff together. And then I was like, I guess if my period came, my hormones would balance out. So then I was like, but how do I get my period to come? Okay. And that was my last thought before I went to sleep at night. And I'm one of those people who figure out all my problems with a good night's sleep. Okay. Basically what happened. I put that question out there and I went to sleep, and I woke up and I was like, I have to vaginal steam. So I woke up and I had remembered this little demonstration. So I did, I grabbed some some water and some herbs that I had laying around, and I did a steam session. And I was like, it was okay. It wasn't very comfortable. My knees were hurting. Like I just was like, I gotta find like a better way to do this. And I searched and I searched and I searched online, and I couldn't find any information on it until I finally found, and this was in 2011, and I finally found that steaming is done in Korea, and that there are Korean spas that offer it. And I found a Korean spa in downtown LA and drove there. And tell me if this is too much.
This is amazing. No, this is so good. I love this story.
So I drove to the spa, and I go in, and like everybody is Korean in there, and everything is written in Korean. So I was looking at this menu in Korean, and I was like, does anything on here say vaginal steam? And the receptionist did not speak enough English, like to, answer that question. I'm like, which one here says vaginal steam? And so she called the owner. She's like, have a seat. So I sat down, and 10 minutes later, the owner shows up. Beautiful Korean woman, this is her spa. And she's like, she spoke more English. And so I told her that I wanted a vaginal steam. And she was just like, you want a vaginal steam? She's like, American women don't do this. I was like, sorry, like this is now the first time she's ever done a vaginal steam for an American. Like that was very rare, And so
and that was just 10, 11 years ago. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and mind you, there was 0 search results. So now we have thousands of search results with vaginal steam. I'll get to that a little bit later.
Oh yeah.
So they told me to go, actually, it's so cool. I love Korean spas, if anybody hasn't gone to them. So they told me to go wait in the red clay sauna. So I was in the red clay sauna with all these little red clay balls. And I was waiting there, and then all of a sudden I started to smell all of these herbs cooking, I started to smell like really strong herbs. And so they called me over, and I did my steam session. But unlike this, red clay spa that was like a private room, I was right by the receptionist. Like I was still right by the door where I had walked in. So I am super shy, and I'm steaming my vagina for the first time, or maybe second time. And they're like, yeah, just sit right here. I was like, right here. And they were like, yeah, just sit right here. They gave me this big plastic cloak. And so I sat down, and honestly, Nicole, then the spa owner talked to me, okay, like throughout it, and so I was just like very shy and very embarrassed. And I can't really tell you that much about that first steam session and how it felt, because I was really just in another place, trying to get through it. Like this just wasn't my of a good time. But I actually ended up learning quite a bit. The Korean spa owner told me that that steaming is a regular practice in Korea, and that it's done at least once a month after the period is over. And then it would also be done if there are any period issues. And they were like, oh, you have a missing period? They were like, okay, this is fine. So you're going to steam and then just wait a couple days, and then your period should return. I was just like, okay, great. So I did the steaming, and I drove home, and I was like, okay, I'm never going to steam in public again. So, like I had definitely made up my mind. I was like, that was crazy. I don't know what I was doing, But when I got home, by the time I had got home, a couple hours later, my period started.
What?
And yeah, like it worked pretty instantaneously. And so now my period looked better than my period had ever looked. Like it was a different period. It was a whole different life for me, like of a period, right? That period really changed my life. It was fresh red blood, and it smelled just like nothing. I don't know how to describe it, but that was not what my periods looked like before. Mind you, I didn't have what we would call period problems, but I do remember being at the gynecologist when I was 21, and they were like, do you have any questions? And I was like, is my period supposed to be brown? And they were like, brown? Well, is it always brown? And I was like, yes. And they were like, then that's what's normal for you. That's fine. Just tell us if it changes. I was like, okay. So now I had been functioning with that information, and now I had this period, and I was like, this is what a period's supposed to look like. And so I decided, okay, that steaming thing was really cool, and I am going to do it after my period is over, like I learned, but I'm going to, so I made my own little witch chair. I MacGyvered a chair, And after my period was over, I did my steam session, and that's how I started steaming.
Okay, that is an incredible story. There's so many things. Oh my gosh. First of all, I just can't even imagine steaming in public like that. I would be equally mortified. And secondly, to have your period come back after it had disappeared for what, months? You said months.
3 months, yeah.
Within hours is miraculous. Of course, you were like, I have to start a business. I mean, of course I have to do this and tell the whole world. We'll get there though. What about the history? Because I know you mentioned the Korean spa, and that was, they'd never worked with an American before. I know there are other countries that they do it. And I know, whose workshop did you go to in LA?
Marcia Lopez.
Marcia, right? Yes, I met Marcia when I was in LA.
Yeah. Yes, okay.
Yes, she's amazing.
Half Mexican, and what she had taught was that this was a Guatemalan practice.
Right.
That this was Guatemalan practice. And then I learned that it was a Korean practice.
Okay. And are there other countries as well where I feel like I've heard that it's practiced in a few other places, but I'm just sort of curious about the history of it, because again, I think that, modern times, which we'll get to, there's so much controversy, and I'm like, but there's a lot of history behind this. This isn't something that people just made up in 2015.
Well, I had the same question. Me and you were very similar. We're asking questions. And I was just like, all right, who learned it from who? The Koreans or the Guatemalans? Like, how did that work, right? These aren't like trade routes that we're familiar with, right?
Right.
And so, so my master's degree is in international development. So I was kind of like positioned to really just be like, what really, where really is this from? And so I actually, I didn't know. I just did, my own practice. And then several years later, when I was pregnant with my first child, I learned in a mom group on Facebook that it was a Ghanaian practice to steam postpartum.
Right.
So now I heard about steaming for period problems, and now I was hearing about it for postpartum, and in Ghana, mind you. And I was like, okay, like here's the African connection, to it. And so that was pretty interesting to me. And so what I did was I started to keep track of, the different places. So Guatemala, Korea, Ghana. The next place I heard about it was in Haiti. And then the next place I heard about it was, I don't know exactly, but I started to hear about records of vaginal steaming, or I started to hear of different instances of vaginal steaming around the world. People started to share with me, oh yeah, we do that back home in Laos after we have, for postpartum, or we do that in Vietnam, or it's done in Germany when somebody is full term and ready to give birth in labor, they'll steam in order to the perineum. Right. And so I started to hear all these different accounts of steaming around the world. And so I started to keep record of it. And I actually, on my website, you can find, I have the vaginal steam world map with the records of steaming all around the world that I have found. Some of them are in books. Ancient accounts of like women's medicine actually have steaming in them. So for example, one of what's called the first book of gynecology, one of the first books on gynecology was written in Italy in the 1100s. And it's called the Trotula. And that book has steaming on every other page. Every single problem, steaming was part of the solution. And but it's in old language, it's usually called fumigation, or it's usually translated as that. But again, it's a description of steaming. I work closely with an acupuncturist, Chris Gonzalez, and she started to find it all throughout traditional Chinese medicine literature, especially the old gynecology books in Chinese medicine and also Korean medicine. So it's something that has actually been around. It's not hidden. We are relearning about it right now, and we're hearing about it as the term vaginal steaming. You do see these early records. Usually it might say something like fumigation or a steam bath, or, there's just different terms that it would be. But literally there's nowhere in the world where steaming hasn't been practiced as a form of gynecology. And what happened was after, so then it was like, well, then how come we're just learning about it? It kind of got lost with modern gynecology. Modern gynecology kind of had a disruption between the care that was done by midwives and female physicians since the beginning of time. And then in the about in the 1500s, Europe started to pass laws that only doctors could attend to women and women's issues and birth. And all of the European countries followed suit. And this was a time when colonization was rampant, right? This was the colonial era. And so they also took those laws with them abroad.
Right.
And so at that time, only men were able to even go to medical school.
Exactly.
So we switched over in just a very short amount of time to where even midwives weren't allowed to attend to births, and women were all of a sudden going to hospitals or into male hands. And that was the beginning of what we have modern gynecology. So the modern gynecology that we have is male-based, and it is not based on men learning what women had been doing. It was based on men actually just all of a sudden being here with a woman, giving birth, and they're like, well, put her on a table and, cut her, do an episiotomy, because I don't think the baby can come out of that, right? Like, it wasn't based on the evidence. It wasn't really based on the practices beforehand. And so that's where modern gynecology started. It's evolved since then, but it has always been a male-dominated field of medicine, and it has always been based on surgery and pharmaceuticals. So that's why we don't know about it. And not only that, it has had authority, and it arose at a time when women were subservient or considered subservient to men. Women were property.
Right. Yes.
Gynecology itself, like who they consider the grandfather of gynecology, he started by doing operations on his own slaves,
Exactly.
female slaves, right? So like we literally have a form of medicine based on women being property and disposable. That's the form of like medicine that we've encountered. And not only that, men having absolute authority over our bodies. That's the gynecology that we have. And I'm not saying that there's nothing useful in it, but that's why we don't know about steaming. Literally in Europe, before men took over gynecology, the trotula was considered the gold standard of women's care and women's bodies. And I'm not sure why they never brought it into the form of modern gynecology that we have right now. But again, it had steaming.
I have some ideas. Yeah.
Even in Egypt, in the tombs, they pulled out like a medicine, a tablet with medicine, and it talks about fumigating it talks about vaginal steaming with myrrh. Literally, there's nowhere you can find any reference of women's medicine and gynecology without reference to steaming.
You've just completely blown my mind. And I am so happy you just shared all of that, because when I think about modern gynecology and I think about all of the plethora of problems that we're dealing with, and you're basically telling me that 600 years ago, this was how we dealt with so many of these problems with steaming or fumigating, and just completely disappeared. And then what you said about how, colonialization, and then basically they exported all of their cultural traditions and their everything, medicine, everything medical ways, I suppose you could say, to all of the countries that they colonized. I mean, that's the whole Caribbean, that's South America, that's Central America, it's the United States, it's Canada. I mean, so it makes sense that it's like a lost art form almost.
Mm-hmm. And there are still people who have practiced steaming with an uninterrupted line where it wasn't interrupted by modern gynecology, but it's only in places in the world where there aren't modern hospitals. Right. So you find indigenous midwives everywhere. Anywhere where you go to rural areas far enough out where it's not an established area with like modern hospitals or modern clinics, you will find that either the midwives or all of the people, especially when it comes to postpartum, that's the most common form that I've seen of steaming that's used around the world. Everybody knows about it. Yeah. In rural areas, in indigenous circles, and it doesn't matter where in the world you are, from Palau to New Zealand to Hawaii, all the way to Tanzania and South Africa. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, like up to the Middle East, over to India, like it's just everywhere. Even in Europe, even found of the records of it in European history as well.
Well, like you said, Germany. My family is originally, like I told you, people who are listening usually know this, but I'm from Antigua originally, like we talked about, but my mom's family is originally from Guyana. And I'm pretty sure I saw something in Suriname about,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
steaming. Yes. I don't know where I saw it, but I saw it recently and I was like, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know, like you said, it's touched
Oh,
everywhere.
Guyanese are steamy chicks.
Yeah. I
They're
have
hot
no
girls.
doubt. I have no doubt about it.
Have you asked your mom about it or your grandma? Like if they did.
No, I don't know that I've talked to my mom about it, but I've had conversations with other people who are either from parts of the Caribbean or from Guyana, and we've had that conversation. So yeah, like it definitely was a thing. Whether it's still a thing or not, I don't know, but I do feel like I did see that history, and so I was like, okay, good. This is still alive and well, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of being, us doing this thing, can we talk a little bit about the benefits? Because you mentioned that postpartum is really that time where a lot of people are using it. And that's like the most often or the most used purpose or the purpose of it most of the time. What else have we got here? Because I feel like I've seen it across the board be helpful for pretty much all period problems. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Okay.
You're like, name it.
Name it, steam fixes it. No, just kidding. So okay, did you ever watch the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
I did, yes.
The dad always had like a bottle of Windex, and he used to like it was his solution for everything. Like he always wanted to just spray Windex on everything, and that was his solution to everything. That's how I feel with steaming, like I just like things that it shouldn't help, like it just appears to help. So again, I do have a background in research and I have a background, in international development. So not only was I paying attention to the different places that I was finding record of vaginal steaming or firsthand accounts of it, I was also paying attention to what it was being used for, right? So in Korea, I found out it was used for just general health, right? Just general health and maintenance. And what the Korean spa owner told me was that if you do this steaming, you won't ever have problems getting pregnant, or you won't ever have problem with cancer. That's what she just, told me. So okay, cool.
That's big claims. It sounds good to me.
I had learned from Marcia that it is used, if somebody has period pain or cramps, right? In Ghana, I learned that it was used for postpartum. In Germany, there are records and midwives use it when somebody is full term and ready to deliver in order to help to soften the perineum and help to open things up, okay? And help the baby come out safely without the mom having any birth injuries or tears, right? So also, going back to Korea I'll go over to China. In China, it's used for infections. Anytime somebody has infections. And in fact, they have a university there who has done a study on steaming where they use steaming for high-risk HPV, stage 4 HPV, and cervical cancer. And what they did was they did two groups, and one group was doing radiotherapy for cervical cancer and high-risk HPV, and the other group was also doing radiotherapy, but they added steaming as well. And that group had a higher survival rate and a less, they ended up with less cancer than the group that did the radiotherapy alone without steaming, right? And anyways, when you go around the world, okay, in Korea, if we go back to Korea, in Korea, they use it for everything. And Korea is actually a really great model for steaming and gynecology because they use modern gynecology and steaming and other traditional modalities like herbs and acupuncture completely all hand in hand. There's not a difference between them.
The way it should be.
Exactly. Exactly. So, this doesn't have to be some hippy dippy thing that, you know what I mean? Like you have to go to Instagram to some corner to learn about. Like there's no reason why it can't be used hand in hand with the care that women receive, right? To use steaming, for example, just even something so simple as this. People are supposed to get pap smears. Women are supposed to get pap smears, right? Some people have had trauma, or like pap smears are like really, really painful, for them, right? Why not just do a vaginal steam before you go in? right? Like it helps to relax the muscles. It helps to make the skin more elastic, which is going to be less painful, right? Like there's just very practical uses for it. There's no reason not to use it, right?
Yeah.
So anyhow, it's used for, also in Korean medicine, it's used for men's health. It's used for colon issues. It's used for hemorrhoids. It's used for prostate, enlarged prostate, and so forth. It's used for impotence. So it's also, they're like, to me, they're like the steamers of the world. Like they're like the most advanced steamers. Because they really use it for everything, and it's not even specifically a woman's health modality. There, it's both used for women's and men's health. But when you think about saunas, we do know that saunas, are helpful. And you see around the world that there are saunas. Doing full body saunas is something that's known to be good for the health, for the skin, for the lungs, and so forth. And so it's the same with steaming, but steaming just targets the genitalia, right?
Yes.
So people sometimes ask, well, why not just do a bath with, herbs? Well, yeah, you can do that. Or you could do a sitz bath where you're just doing the bath, sitting, with your bottom in it. But ultimately, the steam rises. It's a vapor. Steam is water, but in the gaseous form, and it has the ability to rise. And it also has push pressure. It has the ability to push up, right? It has rising. I forget what the terms are for this. I'm not a chemist. But because of that, the steam is actually able to ascend the vaginal canal or ascend, through the penis in a way that just water or sitting in water won't.
Right. Okay. I know we've got to talk about that. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you were just saying about the steam having the capacity to get in there, because there's a lot of controversy with steaming, which we're going to get to, because of course, how could we not talk about this and not talk about the controversy? Because there's so much of that. In fact, my UK editor of the UK version of my book, they wouldn't allow me to include vaginal steaming in the book, because of the negative public view of steaming in the UK. And I was like, really? I was stunned by that. I really was shocked. Yeah. Meanwhile, it was allowed in the US version, not that it's much better in the US, the steaming's reputation. But I want to talk about that, like the steam, because they say this, right? A lot of people's arguments is that, well, you're not steam cleaning your vagina, and I don't understand how you think steam can have this impact. And what you just said goes against what a lot of these detractors say. So I'm curious, is it the combination of the steam and the herbs that you use with it, or is it just the steam alone that can be beneficial, or a bit of both?
So there haven't been, out of the studies that do exist, there are studies on vaginal steaming. They're just mainly in Korean and Chinese language,
right.
that I found in India as well. But there's not a ton. Oh, and then I did a study here in the US, just a little trial study. But there aren't any studies so far that explain why it works. Okay.
Right.
I have my theories. Okay. So my theories, my theory about why it works, I actually have, I think, a breakdown of, like 10 different things to look at about why steaming might be, why we're finding that it's so beneficial. And to go to that point as well, what I started to do, there is a lot of, pushback that there's no way that this could be helpful. And it's kind of frustrating when it's like, but it helped me.
Right.
There's no way it can help you, but it did help me, like within hours. It's kind of frustrating, because it's this, discounting. We're discounting people and their experiences. And then they're like, well, show us the study. And it's like, well, nobody studied it. And
For
that's not
reason. Yes.
That's not my fault. I'm not the one who decides what gets studied. I don't got the millions of dollars and decide what gets studied and what doesn't, right? Exactly. And yes, people will still put this on, like they'll try to put it on me, but anyhow, or on the steam users or on anybody who's speaking about steaming. So what I did was I put together the pelvic steam testimonial database where people could actually just contribute what their own stories are, because we're learning all the things that steaming is helpful for. We're learning about it, right? There are people, I had no idea. I mean, I brought back a missing period. I had no idea how it could help endometriosis or PCOS or fertility, right? Because I didn't have those issues, but there are people who have those issues who swear by steaming. right? And so it's like, I hear these stories, right? And so it's like, okay, well, like I need a way to let other people know these are incredible, stories that I'm hearing, or testimonials. So I did put together the pelvic steam testimonial database, which has hundreds of stories from steam users who are talking about their own experience, how long they steamed, what herbs they used, and what problems they had before, and then what results they saw after steaming. Okay. But as far as why I think that it works, I think it works because when looking at, kind of like you, I actually I used to have a little quiz on my website, and I was like, well, take this little quiz and I could tell you which herbs I think you should be using. And so I saw over 3,000 people's periods. And when I saw their periods, what I noticed was that I think, like, out of just looking at periods, over 98% of them had stagnation in them. So brown blood is a sign of stagnation. I came to this information later. Remember, I started with the gynecologist and they told me that was normal. Well, I started to go to acupuncture randomly. I started to go to acupuncture because I lived in LA, and you just do things in LA.
Totally. So, acupuncture was what got me into all of this too. So I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was at Yosan University at their clinic, and there was a bookstore right next door. Right next to, the clinic where I got the acupuncture. And I bought this book called Diagnosis in Chinese Medicine. It's right over there on my desk. And in there was a chart that said brown blood equals liver qi stagnation. Pink blood equals blood deficiency. And it used a lot of Chinese terms, but it described the period, what the period looks like, what different cycle lengths mean, and so forth. And I was like, yes, this makes sense. That, this stuff that looks anything other than that fresh, healthy period I had after I steamed are signs of imbalances in the body. So anyway, fast forward, I do this, quiz because people want to know what herbs to use. And I'm like, well, I need to know what your period's like. People need different herbs based on what period issue, what period indicators they have. And so what I noticed was everybody has stagnation in their period. Brown blood, clots, and cramps are all signs of stagnation. And even if you only have a little bit of brown blood at the beginning or a little bit of brown blood at the end, and that's how it's always been, and you think that's how periods are supposed to be, that's a sign that the uterus is not getting a full cleanse. And update, periods are uterine cleanses. We have a natural uterine cleanse that happens once a month. And so a lot of times the people who are talking out against vaginal steaming say, well, the uterus is self-cleansing. And they're right, the uterus is self-cleansing. However, that doesn't mean that you get a full cleanse every month. It's not absolute, just like the colon is self-cleansing, but people can get constipated, right? Sure. So when you have those signs of stagnation, that's a sign that you're not getting a full uterine cleanse. And can you imagine if you've had brown periods since the age of 10 or 13, now you're going to 20, 30 years and you're trying to get pregnant. Now you have menstrual residue built up on the walls year after year, month after month, right? Mm-hmm. And some people, I didn't know this, but I find them sometimes. Some people only have 2 or 3 days of brown blood and no fresh blood in their period. That means the uterus is so packed with old residue that the fresh blood can't even make its way through and out, And so my theory on why steaming works so well is because it introduces circulation to the uterus. Even if steam doesn't make its way, people are like, there's no way it's making its way up the vaginal canal and into the uterus. Fine. What if it's not? What if it's not? Well, the whole labia and the vaginal canal, even at the bottom, has veins, that go and are going to increase the circulation in the whole entire uterine artery. There's veins and arteries throughout our whole genitalia. So if you introduce heat anywhere, then you're increasing the circulation. And
so that's absorbent too, that tissue.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that too. Yeah, okay. It's absorbent, right? And so that's helpful when you're introducing the herbs, right? But so even just having, that steam, that's touching the genitalia like that, those veins and arteries are going to go up to the uterus anyways. They're going to go up to the fallopian tubes, up to the ovaries, because they're all interconnected. Right. Not only that, the vaginal canal has hormone receptors, right? That line the walls of the vaginal canal, the cervix, and the internal uterus. So if you have stagnant blood inside the uterus, what is that doing for your hormone feedback system? Right. And so I think one of the reasons why steam works so well is because what you'll see is when you get almost everybody has stagnation, okay? And I think it's because of improper period care and not understanding that the period is a uterine cleanse, and using tampons and things that block the period, the cleanse from being able to even come out, right? So there's reasons why, but everybody's got stagnation. And when you do steaming, what people do is they'll steam. You don't steam during the period, but what people notice is that period after, sometimes they'll have a lot of brown stuff, a lot of clots, a lot of brown, a lot of gunk comes out. That yesteryear menses comes out. And when that happens, then I feel like the uterus can start to function the way it needs to, right? And so you're not, the steam isn't treating endometriosis. The steam is helping to clear out a lot of this old menses and the stagnation that may not be allowing, that may be causing the uterus to mishap, right?
Right.
Endometriosis, the uterus starts growing the lining elsewhere. Well, if the whole uterus, internal lining of the uterus is covered in menstrual blood, then why wouldn't the uterus find somewhere better to grow the lining, right? Like why would the uterus do this? It's unknown, right? But people with endometriosis are able to steam. Mm-hmm. I've noticed that people with endometriosis have basically the worst stagnation I've ever seen out of everybody. And so they have the best clearings after they do their steaming. And guess what? Their endometrial pain goes away, right? So I think it's
incredible.
I think why it's so beneficial is because it increases that circulation and it helps to clear out that old stagnation, which allows the uterus to function the way that it's supposed to function.
Right. Which, yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. At least from my experience of doing steaming, I remember my period pain dramatically dropped. And same thing. I had, I remember that next period, there was just a lot more stuff than what was normal for me coming out. So yeah, and I've heard this across the board, particularly for period pain and heavy periods, and then irregular cycles and missing periods. Those I feel are the ones that I hear most often about it being so beneficial for, just, anecdotal. And I think that's one of the things you brought up, is that can anecdotal evidence be evidence? I mean, I don't understand how we've gotten to the point where we have to have a scientific study to prove everything when women are experiencing what they're experiencing. And if it's helping them, why can't they do it? I just don't understand how we've gotten to this point. And, to go back to what I was talking about with it not being allowed in the UK version of my book, and just the general hate that I see steaming get online. It's fascinating to me. And I know you've dealt with your fair share. But I feel like the most outspoken opponents, funnily enough, are traditionally trained OBGYNs, particularly women, which is also really surprising to me. So yeah, I'm curious what you think about that, because it's crazy. It's really intense online.
It is. It's really intense online.
Yeah.
I just want to, I guess, start, by letting everybody know not all OBGYNs are against vaginal steaming. There are OBGYNs, even here in the United States, who are for vaginal steaming. And they are specifically the OBGYNs who have heard the anecdotal results of steaming, who have heard how it has helped their clients, or who themselves have seen how it has helped them, right? So one that I like to reference is Dr. Lorena White, who's in Maryland, and she's also she's not just an OBGYN, she's also a reproductive endocrinologist. So she's a fertility specialist. She recommends steaming for all of her patients. And she has really, really high success rates at, people getting pregnant in her clinic. Okay. Much higher rates than normal. She's also an acupuncturist, and so also does acupuncture and herbs, and loves Western medicine. She uses those Western medicine tools, right? So this is very unique in the United States because, this is more like a system of, what the Koreans do, naturally. And they're not getting that same hate, towards steaming as is happening here in the media. But, there are more and more examples like that. In the Czech Republic, steaming is now in over 30 hospitals, used in the maternity wards, again, by the OBGYNs, by the obstetrical nurses. They use steaming. It's something that they offer their patients when they're in early labor. That if they would like to steam, they'll set up a steam for them in like a geriatric chair. They have their hospital way that they do it. And what they're finding, and the reason why they love it when their patients do it, is that the patients don't, they have, I'm not sure we're going to see what the statistics are, but like the last I heard, there was zero tearing, like less birth injuries. Like there's like no tearing when the patients choose to do the steaming, right? Which makes sense because the steam makes the skin, soft and more flexible, like elastic. And then, so there are OBGYNs using it. And then in Korea, there's OBGYNs using it. There are OBGYNs who are using it. And then in America, we've got this like media and like, I don't know, there's like one, particular OBGYN who's like very much loves to like go into the media and talk about controversial topics and has like kind of painted vaginal steaming as this very ridiculous thing. And I find that all of the other media articles that are talking about steaming in that way are referencing her and her original articles, that she came out with. Yep. The thing is that steaming, remember there were 0 articles about steaming. Then there were a couple articles coming up when I started Steamy Chick. And then I was the only person on the whole World Wide Web with any results in English about vaginal steaming. And then it changed one day. One day it changed, okay? And it was when Gwyneth Paltrow wrote on her blog that she went to a Korean spa and did a vaginal steam.
I have that in my notes here. I was like, I know that was when it changed. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all of a sudden I was getting phone calls and emails from everybody. And they were like, so what happened was Gwyneth Paltrow went to a Korean spa. She did a steam. She loved it. She recommended it on her blog. And then the media was like, did Gwyneth Paltrow just talk about her vagina? And so they just went with that, and they started calling up OBGYNs that speak to the media and going, hey, Gwyneth Paltrow says that people should be steaming their vagina. What do you think about that? And OBGYNs who had no idea what steaming was, have no evidence about it, aren't aware of the studies that do exist about it and have never heard, they're hearing about it for the very first time. We're like, yeah, don't do that. Exactly. Right. And so
no context at all.
Yeah, no context. That was the medical opinion that was given. And the United States and UK are the places where it's the most, hated, and ultimately these articles, like when one of the doctors, one of the OBGYNs said to the media, I think that the worst case scenario is that people could die if they steam. And, I hear about it because people are like, oh my God, I have your herbs. Am I going to die? I just read this article,
Oh my God.
And so he said very specifically in the article, well, I don't know what that entails. Right. Oh, right. Okay. So this is an opinion, everybody, based on somebody who doesn't know what it is. Okay. First and foremost, he admitted that. Okay. He said, but blowing pressurized air into the vagina could cause a rupture, or an embolism, which could be deadly. And I don't know how they know that and who's been blowing air into the vaginas, but yeah, that could be deadly, they're like, and then they like describe like they had like, I've seen like a photo, a cartoon of somebody putting a leaf blower up somebody's vagina and being like, don't do this is deadly, as a depiction of what we're doing with steam.
My gosh.
Again, like
they're so extra. I can't.
They're just going, they're getting real extra. And so anyways, that's not what steaming is, and and so, but when you look at these articles, it's doctor after doctor who has no idea what steaming is, and the OBGYNs who do know what it is are actually a little bit more like, well, if somebody's finding benefit, then I don't see any reason not to, right? And then you have the doctors who really know what it is, and either they themselves have used it or they've seen and read the studies that do exist. They've seen the benefits with their patients. Another one is in Atlanta. I'm going to think of Dr. Tasha Rogers. She also is an OBGYN who has a steam spa right in her clinic and recommends it specifically for people who are dealing with recurring infections, right? And so it's not that no OBGYNs recognize the benefit of it. It's just that, like how you said, there just hasn't been the medical studies on it. And for some reason, we are in this time period where if there's not a, medical study that's been funded by the, NIH, then it's just people just dismiss it as, garbage. But what we have to remember is that just because something hasn't been studied doesn't mean that it doesn't have benefit. It just means that those that are studying things and who have the money to fund studies are unaware of it, or they themselves don't know the benefit of it. And another thing to remember about this is that only 1% of the funding put into medical research is on women's health topics. Right. And that 1% of funding is over 99% on pharmaceuticals. So that's where the going. That's where the research is going. So we know a lot about pharmaceuticals. That's
where the money is coming from too. So it makes sense.
Literally, if that's what we're looking for, if that's what we're studying, then that's what we're going to know about. And there's no reason to believe that. Like you think of one of my colleagues, she's a PhD researcher, and she's like, science just found out like a couple of years ago that the clitoris is an entire organ, and
exactly.
That it's not one point, right? So is it ridiculous? Like they didn't know that, right? Because nobody had looked at it, nobody had studied it. So it's just a reminder that there's very little known and very little research that has been done about women's bodies and any health treatments other than surgery and pharmaceuticals. That's just the system that's the form of medicine that we currently have.
Yeah, 100%. I know. Yeah, I know. We could go on and on about that. But I feel like you have such good information compiled on your website. So I feel like people can definitely go there if they want to learn more. Can we just talk real quick about the potential contraindications? Because the thing we hear most often is, but you can burn your vulva. Like, don't put steam on the vulva because you'll burn yourself, as if women are just morons and we have no idea how to gauge whether a steam below us is too hot. It's like the same as if you get like a steam facial, or I like stick my head down near the dishwasher when I open it up and I get the steam on my face. If it's too hot, I back off. I mean, this is not rocket science, people. So I hope I'm not the only one who does that. It's like, it feels so nice, especially in the winter time. I don't know. I have problems, but anyway, so like we can tell if something is too hot. I imagine that maybe there are some instances where someone might burn themselves, but accidents happen in every area of our lives. It's not like this is just some unique thing where we're just prone to damaging our reproductive organs. So what do you see, or are there any problems associated with it?
Yeah, I mean, like how you said, test the steam before you do it. I do think that for beginners, the best thing is to not use, like, sometimes the steams like will be set up with an electric burner and then a pot, and then you can sit over it, right? Either in a chair or sauna. I recommend doing your first steam, what I call a no heater steam setup, which is without the heater, because like ultimately you're going to sit over it and you're going to be like, oh, this is nice. Kind of like when you're in the bath and you're like, I want it a little hotter, And I think that that's actually usually the first experience that we should have. That way it's like, okay, next time I want to have the heater under it, and then you can longer and you can enjoy it, and I think that's the best thing, actually, just even to like, for our own fears, while sitting over it, you feel, kind of exposed the first time that you do it. So it's as soon as you sit there, honestly, usually people have a reaction where they go, it's just, kind of like, it's just that hot shower on you, or, that dip into the bath or into jacuzzi. Like that's the kind of sensation that you get, when you do that steam. And yeah, everybody be careful, test it first. Contraindications there are, please nobody steam when you have any fresh menses or fresh bleeding. That could cause the bleeding to get heavier, right? Because all the uterine arteries are open. So, you don't want to now, speed up that blood and that and make it come out faster. Okay. Mm-hmm. So don't steam during fresh bleeding. You don't steam at all during pregnancy. Steaming does open, or at least there are signs and observations that it appears to open the cervix. We know this because when people steam and if you look at their period and they have stagnation, right? A lot of times people will steam, and right after steaming, and they're nowhere near their period, they'll have brown blood come out.
Right.
that would be a sign that the cervix was opened up. Okay. And that, some of the uterine matter came out, right?
Mm.
So do not steam when pregnant, because we don't want to open the cervix. The cervix is supposed to be closed tight to keep baby safe. Okay. Now,
Right.
that said, when somebody's full term and preparing for labor or in labor, steam is actually safely used by midwives around the world to help to labor to progress, to help if labor stalls, and to help prevent birth injuries. Okay. Then
Okay.
steam is also used postpartum. And for postpartum, I really recommend working with a midwife or a doula who's trained how to do postpartum steaming. It's basically beneficial, like as soon as possible. If you want more information about it, check out the 4th trimester vaginal steam study, which was a trial study that that me and my team did, where we looked at women. We looked at a group of women who did 5 days of steaming postpartum, and then we compared them to women who did not do any steaming, but we did exams on everybody on day 4 and 8 to compare the differences, and the results were just astounding. Our steam group had our non-steam group, the poor group, all of their blood pressure went up, whereas our non-steam group blood pressure went down. One of the main causes of postpartum death is eclampsia, which is basically high blood pressure. So to know that steaming was able to bring everybody in that group's blood pressure down, could be something that saves lives, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, their lochia, their postpartum discharge cleared a lot faster. Their stitches, for some reason, everybody had stitches, in both groups. We didn't do the steaming with them prior, so this was just by chance. And our steam group, again, any of the burning and discomfort and itchiness they had with this stitches actually went away after 1 or 2 days of steaming. And our non-steam group continued to have problems up until a month later. So anyways, it can really help to, it's really helpful postpartum. And so if you're interested, learn, more about that. And then
what about with an IUD?
Yeah, you can steam with an IUD. I recommend the no heater. Okay, so everybody can do a no heater 10-minute steam setup with water. Okay? Now, if you're going to use herbs, you need to know what type of period you have and make sure that you're using the right herbs for that period. Okay. Right. So people who have, for example, some people bleed all the time, like they have their period every 2 weeks, okay, or every 3 weeks. Then they're going to have herbs that help to elongate their cycle. Okay. Now, those are the exact opposite herbs of somebody who has a missing period. Somebody who has a missing period, we want herbs that are going to encourage the cycle to come.
Right.
They're the exact opposite herbs, right? And so this is why it's really hard with herbs, once we start talking about that. But there are like if you use a small amount of herbs, maybe a little chamomile or a little mint, like anybody could probably use those ones. They're very safe. Or you can just do water with a little bit of salt, or you can come to my website and figure out which herbs you need.
Yes,
right?
That's a good suggestion.
You want herbal properties that match the things that are going to balance out your cycle, but yes, people with IUDs can steam. Now, speaking of people who have their period every 2 weeks or have, mid-cycle bleeding like that, I do think you have to be really careful. Steaming can bring, when somebody has that type of pattern, steaming with the wrong herbs can cause the onset of bleeding. So you want to be careful. And I do recommend if anybody has those, 2 periods per month, for example, or spontaneous bleeding, work with do a consultation first. Do a consultation with a practitioner so that they can make sure to get you steaming with the results that you're going to want, which is actually getting your cycle coming every 28 to 30 days rather than every 2 weeks.
Right. Amazing. Oh my gosh. This was all amazing and so incredibly insightful and helpful. Thank you so much, Keli.
Oh yeah, for sure. Thank you.
So good. And I know you mentioned, were you going to say something? No. Okay. I know you mentioned on your website, you used to have a quiz. Do you not have the quiz anymore? What's the best option for people when they come to your site?
Yeah, come to the site, check out the directory. Okay. So you go to steamychick.com. If you're looking for a practitioner, go to the directory. I've certified over 1,000 practitioners around the world, so you can find whoever's nearest to you and be able to go and experience your first steam session with somebody and have a little intake form so that you know which herbs you need and what setup is best for you. Because other people, mind you, are really going to want that heater set up and to steam for 30 or 45 minutes. If somebody has endometriosis, that's ideal, but we just have to make sure they don't have any bleeding issues and that we get them the right herbs, for example. So check out the directory, check out the herb section. I do have, I took away the quiz for now, but I do have descriptions of, okay, hey, if this is you, then you want these herbs. If this is you, you want these ones, so I give the descriptions of kind of like the different period profiles that we're looking at and which herbs are going to be necessary. Check out the FAQs section that has all of the research with the vaginal steaming records around the world, all the existing studies that do exist on vaginal steaming, and also testimonials. It has the pelvic steam testimonial database and just my theories on the reasons why steaming works. I had wanted to tell you, because you're such a hormone expert, there's one study that was done by like Northwest University. I don't have all of it. I can send it to you later. But what they did was they noticed that if they stimulated the cervix on animals, that it caused a higher release in oxytocin. Mm. And so they believe that it can help explain why like sex or stimulation in the vaginal canal and cervix causes an oxytocin release in women. Well, steaming stimulates the inner vaginal canal and the cervix, if not anything more. And so what they found was that there was like a 40% or something more oxytocin release. And one of the things that people will say when they're talking about steaming and the results of steaming is that they have their breast milk increases, right? Which is oxytocin is related to. They'll say that they feel happier and less stressed out, more relaxed. And that lovemaking is enhanced, right? That they feel like an enhanced, whether it's orgasm or, these different things. And so it makes sense to me. Like when I read that study, I was like, wow, this must be what's happening with steaming. And then there are other people who steam that get really sleepy and fall asleep after. Again, it's almost like, these are all signs of oxytocin. These are all signs of oxytocin being released into the body. So, again, those studies haven't been done about steaming and how it impacts the hormones. I love actually working with people who do testing and are aware of the hormones and test their own hormones. And they see big changes like, okay, wow, my FSH, hormone was way higher this month after steaming, right? Like these are the people who are, working on their fertility and want to make sure. And so there are differences. And again, my theories around it have to do with it. I think that it's enhancing the uterus's overall circulation, getting rid of that stagnation, which I think this is a disruptor to the hormones, and then allowing the uterus to function more optimally. Right. And so, but
anyway, what about like blood? I mean, I would say we have to wrap this up, but it's all good. What about blood flow though? Because I just think of blood flow coming to the ovaries. The ovaries need that. They need that stimulation. They need nutrients coming to them. I mean, that's how they function. They need magnesium and zinc and all of them, the B vitamins. So it makes a lot of sense to me.
An artery that goes directly to the heart, which goes directly to the circulatory system and the whole body. So this is where I end up feeling like the person with the Windex.
Yes.
You can see them and they're like, my little toe has been bothering me because I kicked, I stubbed it and I steamed and all of a sudden the pain went away. Like right. Like, my eyelashes are thicker, right? It's actually something that has to do with hormones, but people will report all of this stuff. And I just shrug and I'm just like, that's amazing.
Yeah, put it in the testimonial directory.
Ultimately, when you increase the circulation, you just increase the body's overall ability to do what it was supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah, but your ovaries then function better. They make more estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and you feel better because those hormones basically affect everything.
100%. Then in acupuncture, there's one point that, so they consider there's a circulatory system basically in the top half of the body and then the bottom half of the body, okay? And there's one point that's the one point that you could needle or touch or stimulate that brings together the upper and the bottom system, and it's right there on the perineum. And when you're steaming, you're stimulating that needle or that point, which doesn't get needled because it's too intimate of a point, at least only in like emergency situations it would ever be needed. It doesn't get needled, but that's the point that's known that will stimulate both the upper and lower circulatory systems.
Wow.
Right? And any acupuncturist listening to this is gonna know exactly which point I'm talking about. And I'm not an acupuncturist, disclaimer. But yeah, so anyway, so it really just increases, the body's ability to function the way that it's by increasing that circulation.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, thank you again. This was just too good. So good. And now I'm like, I need to go steam. That's what I need to go do right now, immediately. To solve all my health problems. But thank you again so much, Keli. And just repeat again where everyone can find you and, all your good work and the incredible research you've compiled.
Sure. My website is steamychick.com, and I'm also on Instagram at Steamy Chick.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you again, Keli. This was incredible.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It was a party, our kind of party.
Exactly.
This is what we consider a party, but it felt like the best time I've had
in a long time, right? Yeah, I know. Same. I know. This is definitely our type of party. Thank you again. That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at NicoleJardim.com/quiz.